Lords and ladies, I greet you. Since the announcement of Avowed, there's been a tremendous amount of confusion surrounding the game, and the purpose of this video is to dispel this confusion. There's a great deal of misunderstanding, I think, and a lot of it has to do, unfortunately, with the recent appearance of the awful game Dragon Age The Veilguard. And I think it's important to be discerning here, and I think it's important to be able to disentangle fact from fiction, which is the purpose of this video. So, a lot of people, primarily people who are not familiar with Eora, although not exclusively, have been very critical of the presentation of Avowed. They think it is just another quote-unquote woke game, basically. They think it is, even in some cases, akin to Dragon Age The Veilguard, which it is not, definitively not. Now, I understand where this misunderstanding comes from. Again, lack of familiarity with the setting, and to some degree, the somewhat colorful art tone, as well as the art style, to some degree. But apart from that, there's very little to almost nothing in common between Dragon Age The Veilguard and Avowed. So, one of the primary things I need to get out of the way, the elephant in the room, is this notion that Avowed will be heavily politicized, i.e. woke, in the same sense as Dragon Age The Veilguard. Now, it should be observed that overwhelmingly most developers in the gaming industry are left-wing. That doesn't necessarily make it woke. It doesn't make Avowed necessarily woke. And there are good lore reasons for seeing certain things. So one of the accusations I've seen is the accusation that one of the companions is basically a furry, i.e. the game is quote-unquote woke. This character, her name is Yahtzee, is in fact an Orlin. And Orlins are a race in Eora. They go way back to the original Pillars of Eternity, which was released in 2015, and they're basically Eora's equivalent of halflings. There are two subspecies. She is a Hearth Orlin, they're the less hairy variant, and you have the Wild Orlins, all of which you can see on the screen. Now, Orlins are part and parcel of the Pillars universe. They come in a wide variety of colors in terms of their hair and ear tufts, as well as skin color. Orlins are just another race that is endemic native to Eora. In fact, and this shouldn't surprise you one bit, you can actually play an Orlin in both Pillars 1 and 2. So they're just part of the lore, they're just part of the world. Now, if you're not familiar with the setting of the Pillars of Eternity, or the world of Eora, then you might see a character like Yahtzee and think, oh my god, it's a furry, it's quote-unquote woke. But no, Orlins are part of the world, and they've been part of the world since the inception of Pillars, because obviously Obsidian came up with the concept of Orlins way before the game was actually released. Another accusation I've seen bandied about is that the game is woke because of the inclusion of what appears to be a black person, Giata. Now, again, this type of human is part of the setting in Eora. There are three types of sub-races of humans. You have the meadow folk, who typically have light features, light eyes, light hair, light skin, sort of Scandinavians, Northwestern European types. Then you have the savanna folk, who are more like a Mediterranean folk in terms of their appearance, and then you have the ocean folk. Now, Giata is part of the ocean folk, and they're their own people. They have their own culture. It is called the Vailian culture, and they're part of the world. This is not some strange, quote-unquote, woke insert just to be there for the sake of being. Again, these people are part of the world of Eora since the get-go. They've always been there. This has nothing to do with woke. Now, in terms of the color scheme of the game, there have been other people making the claim that it's too purpley, it's too bright, and that's an indication of wokeness. I'm not so sure about that. We are dealing with a new area of Eora, it's called the Living Lands, and they made the decision that some parts of this area that we're exploring are going to be brighter, are going to be more colorful, but I've seen plenty of other footage and images where it's pretty dark, it's not as bright, it's not as cheerful. So that argument fails to launch as well. The point I'm trying to make here is that people who are unfamiliar with the setting are casting judgment on a setting they know nothing about, which I don't think is fair. And it's also somewhat understandable that many people have been driven insane and have become deranged due to the very obvious going overboard with the insertion of real-world politics in modern games. I've made my own position very clear. Games should be fun, and they should serve as a vehicle of escapism. I think politics, if they're not the politics contained within the game setting, confined within the universe, of the game should ideally be excluded. That is my opinion, my view. And so I'm not in favor of inserting things just for the sake of inserting them or for political reasons. That doesn't make any sense. But people need to become more discerning about things. Not everything you look at is quote-unquote woke because you see a color here or a race such as the Orins. It's important to be discerning because otherwise you will drive yourself and other people insane in the process. There's no doubt that many games have overt and poorly conveyed political messaging, and a lot of political insertions that needn't be there for the sake of a political agenda or ideology. I don't think Avowed is one of them. I think there's very little evidence to suggest that. So, I'm telling you this, to be frank, as an expert on the world of Eora. I have thousands of hours between the games of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. I know the setting very well, I know the world, so you have to trust me on this. These are not superfluous additions, they happen to be part of the universe. That's it, that's the end of it. As far as other concerns about Avowed, whether or not it's going to be a proper RPG, I went back to look at the footage from the Gamescom, and the very basic dialogue is miles, leagues better than anything you encounter in Veilguard. There's more choice on display, in terms of RPG choices of course, in a 30-minute demo of Avowed than you find in the entirety of the whatever it is, 80 plus hours you have to play to finish Dragon Age The Veilguard. The dialogue is noticeably of greater quality. The choices are already present and better. On top of that, you have stats in Avowed. You have strength, you have dexterity, you have constitution, you have intellect, perception, and resolve. And all these stats contribute to different things. You will have to craft a character who cannot be universally strong. You will have to craft a character that plays to the strengths of the type of protagonist you want to play. If you're going to play a fighter, then you better stock up on strength. If you're going to play a wizard, you better stock up on intellect. And these choices of attributes have an effect on dialogue too. Sometimes, if your attributes are high enough, they can affect the dialogue positively in your favor. That's a very powerful and well-recognized RPG mechanic that is present in Avowed. There are different types of potions and grenades in Avowed, reminiscent, to be honest, of Pillars of Eternity. In fact, a lot of the things that you see in Avowed have been, in a good sense, in a good way, ported over from the Pillars of Eternity series. And so for veterans like myself and others, it's very recognizable. The point I'm trying to make here is that in terms of RPG-ness, so to speak, Avowed, based on a 30-minute demo, demonstrates more quality, more options, and more opportunities in terms of being an RPG than Dragon Age The Veilguard does in the entirety of the game. So the concerns people have that Avowed is somehow going to be similar to Dragon Age The Veilguard are based on being poorly informed, based on a lack of discernment and poor observation. I don't mean that as an insult, but it is important to pay attention to details here. Now, as I've stated in my previous video on Avowed, I am obviously very biased. As I said, I have thousands of hours between Pillars 1 and 2. I love the setting, I love the universe. It's probably my favorite setting, full stop. So I am biased, but what I'm telling you here is not based on bias. These are features in the game that have been directly lifted from the lore and history of Pillars. So if you're worried about Avowed not being an RPG, in the same vein as Dragon Age The Veilguard, which is not an RPG at all, you don't have to worry. Already in the 30-minute demo, which I enjoin you to watch again if you've not yet watched it, you can see more choice and consequence than in the entirety of the game of Dragon Age The Veilguard. On top of that, you can see that the art style is not really comparable. Now, it's very unlikely, in my opinion and observation, that Avowed is going to be an overly politicized game in the same vein as Dragon Age The Veilguard, which is a terrible game on its own, and then on top of that you add the poorly implemented real-world politics that very few people actually want to see in a game. They just want to have fun, and it's a disaster. I don't think Avowed is going to be that. There's very little evidence to support that. Now, also in terms of the writing, as I mentioned, I just want to point this out, that the director, Carrie Patel, is a Pillars of Eternity veteran. After Josh Sawyer, who's also been consulting for the game, by the way, she was one of the head honchos. She wrote huge parts of DLC for Pillars of Eternity, The White March. She has a lot of experience in Eora, in the universe, as do many of the writers and people who are involved in the narrative and creation of this game. This is not, again, like Dragon Age The Veilguard, where you have people that were primarily operating in the realm of The Sims, and other people who had never played Dragon Age Origins and couldn't even remember who Zevran was. These are people that are steeped in the world of Eora, and I think that's a very important point to make. You don't really need to worry about this game in terms of it being quote-unquote woke, or in terms of it losing the flavor and character of the setting of Eora. Not everything is as it seems to be upon first glance. In this case, almost all the worries and concerns come from people who have no familiarity with the previous games, which is fine. I'm just trying to set the record straight here. Now, other than that, I stand unambiguously by what I said in terms of the pricing. It is overpriced. 70 euros, or 90 euros if you want to pre-order it, is ridiculous. On top of that, Obsidian or Microsoft really needs to push this title back to March so it has time to be enjoyed, so people can actually play it. There's frankly speaking way too much competition in February, and it is not a good point to release it. The 18th of February, or even earlier, is a terrible time to release this game. I hope the people are aware of this, and I hope they change course. But as I said, go check out the Gamescom 30-minute demo. You will see more RPG goodness in those 30 minutes than you ever saw in Dragon Age The Veilguard and many comparable games. It's definitely going to be an RPG, and we have to wait and see ultimately. But I think there's very little evidence to support these concerns that people have about specific things. In any event, thank you for tuning in as always. If you like my content, my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. Really helps out the channel. It's much appreciated, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.